Welcome back to Network Africa. There have been reactions, varying reactions to the new climate change deal. Leaders inside the hall praised it, but environmental activists outside, as leaders discussed, were criticizing it as well as the rest of the world.
Activists outside the climate change conference were anything but pleased at the outcome of the meetings. Many denounced the draft, saying the accord favored richer nations.
A lot of talk, and it was great that the smaller countries were talking about 1.5 degrees, but there was no agreement reached, and the richer countries are doing nothing about it. Too much in the pockets of the oil and gas corporations.
Justice! Climate! Justice! Climate! Justice!
But the deal creates a system to encourage nations to make good on voluntary domestic efforts to curb emissions and provide billions more dollars to help poor nations cope with the transition to a greener economy. The demonstrators dismissed the ambitious language, saying that hot civic movements are better equipped than governments to deal with the impacts of climate change.
We are of course disappointed with the first version of the text, and I'm sure we'll be even more disappointed with the last version of the text. But civilians have shown that they're too. We are of course disappointed with the first version of the text, and I'm sure we'll be even more disappointed with the last version of the text. But civilians have shown that they're the ones who have had the solutions and not the governments.
Back inside the conference building, India's Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar criticized the deal for setting too low a bar for success.
While give and take is a normal in negotiations, we are of the opinion that the agreement could have been more ambitious. We share the concerns of several friends that agreement does not put us on the path to prevent temperature rise below 2 degrees, and that actions of developed countries are far below their historical responsibilities and fair share. We have, in the spirit of compromise, agreed on a number of phrases.
Meanwhile, the Nicaraguan delegate Paul Oist says the agreement was not enough, adding that many of the intended nationally determined contributions are sufficient. However, shortly after the deal was announced, world leaders began to react. U.S. President Barack Obama hailed the agreement as ambitious and historic, but also warned against complacency.
In my first inaugural address, I committed this country to the tireless task of combating climate change and protecting this planet for future generations. 2 weeks ago in Paris, I said before the world that we needed a strong global agreement.
Those were reactions to the climate change deal agreed in Paris over the weekend. Let's understand what we're really getting into here. A climate change expert, Mr. John Osonwa, joins us now on Network Africa. Dr. Osonwa, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Now, what does this agreement mean for us here in Africa?
Well, the issue has always been about funding. The developed nations, as you know, contributed a lot more to climate change. And unfortunately, we are feeling the ravages of climate change, but we don't have the funding to deal with mitigation and adaptation. So for the first time, we now have an agreement which says that the $100 billion annually will be funneled to developing nations by the year 2020. And that is just the floor. The notion is that there will be an increase over time. So that is good for developing nations. The other thing that is good is this agreement allows for flexibility. We now rely on what we call intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs, which is a bottom-up approach, allows countries to do what is politically and economically feasible for them. There's no big brother, again, forcing down standards and targets on any country. So that is good.
Dr. Osonwa, I'm afraid we have to go now. Thanks for joining us on the program. We'll get more on this during the week as leaders figure out how they would apply the new deal to their various countries. Moving on now, hundreds of Sudanese refugees have set up camp outside the UNHCR in the Jordanian capital after fleeing their homeland seeking refuge in the kingdom. They say they have not been offered any kind of support or assistance from the agency. Some refugees accuse the United Nations agency of favoring refugees from other war-ravaged countries like Syria. But the UNHCR says this is not the case. Now, according to the representative, Sudanese people are about 3,500 and 2,000 of them are classified as the most people who are in need. He says in Jordan, they have more than 41 nationalities and there's no differentiation between any nationality, either Sudanese, Syrian or Iraqi. And as we end Network Africa, here's your question for the day. What do you make of South Africa's third attempt at choosing a finance minister? Tell us your thoughts. Send them to networkafrica@channelstv.com or tweet at me at Amarachi_Ubani. Thanks for joining us on the program. See you next time.